It's time for the final. You know it's just a test, right? Greetings and welcome to another episode of Is This Going to Be on the Test? I would like to talk to you about the final today. I'm Joe Burns, I'm a PhD, and this semester I'm going to give four finals of the four classes that I have this semester. I find it interesting how much fear the final strikes into the hearts of students. It's, you know, if I've done terribly on everything all semester, but if I get an A on the final, I get an A in the class. Doubt it. I've done great on everything all semester, but if I fail the final, I fail the class. If you've been doing great all semester, what in the world makes you think you're going to fail the final? And if you have A's all the way through the semester and you flunk the final, you really think it's going to have that much effect? Here's what I want you to do. Go get your syllabuses, take a look at the total number of points in the class. Then take a look at the total number of points for the final. If it happens that the final is like 50 points, but there are 400 points in the class, we're only talking the final being an eighth of the class. You should easily be able to cover those points. Now, there are classes, and I didn't run into them until I was in PhD school. They're generally called seminar classes where there are no tests throughout the semester. There is just the lecture, just coming to class, just discussion, and then at the end you do either one major paper or one major test, and that's your final grade. If that's the case, then yes, you'd best be darn well concerned about it. However, I don't think that happens in undergrad. It's not the way it's set up. PhD school, yeah, probably. You might run into one in master's program, but undergrad? I highly doubt it. So number one, in terms of your final, and I know I probably should have done one of these for the midterm, but I missed it. So the final's coming up. What you need to do is put your final in perspective to the class. What percentage of the class is the final? That's what you need to be concerned about, because that's going to tell you whether you actually do have any problems. I would suggest to you even going as far as creating something that suggests, here's how many points are in the class, here's how many points I have. If I get this on the final, I get an A. If I get this on the final, I get a B. If I get this, I get a C. And the only reason I say that is because I do it. Before the finals, I figure all the grades without the final, and then I figure the grades if the person gets an A, B, C, D, so I know whatever their score is, bang, that's the grade they get. And many of my classes don't have a test. They have a project. I teach HTML web design, and their final project is to hand in a finalized hand-coded website. It's worth 100 points. 100 points! You know, if they had just done the homework all semester long, they'd have 140 points. If they had just done all the assignments all semester long, they'd have 125 points. So the final is not the be-all and end-all. Now, if you've put yourself in the position where if I don't do well on the final, off the cliff and the little Wile E. Coyote cloud at the end, then that's kind of your concern. So let's talk about the final. Now, if you're watching these things in order, we're weeks and weeks out from the final. We're somewhere in the midst of a month and a half out. You still have registration to go through and probably quizzes and attendance grades and things like that until it. But if the final is coming up, here are my suggestions. First, put it in perspective. What does it really mean? Don't just let the word final scare you to death. Dun, dun, dun. Nah. Figure out what it means. Then, what I would do is ask if the teacher is going to do any kind of review session. If he's going to do a review session or she's going to do a review session, gosh, that was a tongue twister. Go to that review session. If they're going to create a study guide or a study sheet, which I never do, see, I'm of the opinion you should have your own study sheet. It's called your notes. But if he or she is going to make one, make sure you get it. And figure out, you've heard me say this 1,000 times. What are the rules? What are the parameters? Is it a just simple narrative test? Is it multiple guess? Is it some other method of being tested? Find out the rules. And here's another thing you really should ask. Not a lot of people think about this, but you really should ask about it. Is this test based on your lectures, or will it include things from the readings in the book that were not brought up in class? That's really something to be concerned about, because it does jump up and bite students every so often that a professor will make a section of the test or questions or something on the test that basically state, it was in your book. You should have known this. You read the book. You should have known this. I would ask that directly. Is this based on your lectures, or is this based on what's in the book? Make sure of that. There's an old joke that goes, a woman takes a class on ornithology, birds. And for all semester long, she studies plumage and calls and migratory patterns and all those things. And she shows up for the final. She's doing well all the way through the class. She shows up for the final, and there's a bunch of models up front that look like birds' feet. Okay, so she sits down and the test is passed out, and it states at the top of the test, please simply identify these birds' feet and hand in your test to the TA. So she raises her hand and says, Professor, when did we go over birds' feet? And the professor says, it's in the book. Well, this infuriates this woman, and she jumps up and starts to run out of the class, throwing the test in the air and, screaming obscenities at the professor. And the professor stands up all upset and goes, young lady, what is your name? And she kicked off her shoe and held her foot up and said, I don't know, you tell me, it's in your book. Thank you. Full bow at the waist, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure you find out what the test is all about. Now, let me tell you a couple other things that kind of jump up every so often that people think are really good ideas, but I've never thought were. You get people that will say to you, hey, you want to be in a study group? Personally, I don't care for study groups. I don't like them. I don't like doing them. And the reason is because in any study group, normally the studying goes for, 15 minutes, and then we all begin gossiping about this person or that person or what have you. Now, I don't know about your study groups, so maybe study groups are the way to go, but me personally, I wouldn't get into a study group, and that's just my thought process. It's up to you. Now, will I find a study partner? Yes, that I will do. I'll find a person who is on the same level as me, and if that person wishes to get together and study and compare notes and create study guides of our own, if there isn't one provided by the professor, or even if there is one provided by the professor, then I would do that. But a study group, like 10, 15 people in a room, no. Not me, kids. I'm not going to do it because I don't want to get into the, Bob likes Jenny. Jenny doesn't like Bob. Jenny likes Fred. Fred doesn't like Jenny. Fred likes Bob. And round and round and round they go. The other thing is study. study for this thing. And I don't mean the night before, staying up all night. I've said this before talking about tests. That idea of staying up all night and cramming is horrible. The outmost number of facts you're going to receive in your head and keep is 8. And you won't get any higher than 8. What I would suggest to you is the method of studying that I laid out in my studying episode. If you haven't seen it, I urge you to go read it. I would not just stand there and stare at the book and look and stare at the book and such. Take your notes, take your study guide, take those things and write them and write them and write them and then write them again. But before you do any of this stuff, it's a test. It's only called a final because it's the last one in the class. What if the first in the class was called a primary? I don't know, I'm making stuff up now. It doesn't matter. It's a test. Come at it with the same veracity you would any other test. But first, put it in perspective. Really, what percentage of the class is it? And that probably won't make it so big and scary. And that wraps it up. Good luck on your finals. To be honest with you, you should have your grade so high that when you hit those finals, what you get is fairly immaterial. You're going to kill it anyway. There you go. I'm Joe Burns. Will this be on the test? Well, it'll be on the final.